All right, folks, thanks for joining me again. I have another wonderful person who's living abroad, and this is Kem Kem. Thanks for joining me, Kem Kem.
Thank you for having me.
So, Kem Kem, tell us, where is this your first time living abroad? Where are you from? Give us all those juicy details.
I'm originally actually from Nigeria. I'm West Africa, but I moved to the US when I was 12. So I've been living there for a lot of years. And we left the US 7 years ago.
Where
And
did you go when you left the US?
when I left, we first moved to Malta because, my research, I had narrowed it down to like 3 or 4 countries: Panama, Belize. What was the other one? Uruguay, and what was the last one? Malta. But Malta
Okay.
won out because it was English speaking as a primary language along with Maltese, and thought that it would be a little bit easier to go into expat life, with a place that spoke English. So it worked out well. But
So when you decided to move abroad, what was your reasons for moving abroad?
well, I think it's usually the same thing for a lot of people. I had a sister, one of my immediate older sister, got sick, and she had breast cancer, and it went into her lungs, and she passed away. And at that point, I started thinking about it seriously. We had mentioned it before, we talked about it, but we really didn't do anything about it. But when that happened, it really lit a fire under my butt. And then 4 months after my sister passed away, his father passed away suddenly. So that really cemented it for us to live the kind of life we wanted to, a life of travel and seeing different places, and not be tied down by the work, the stress and everything else that comes along with it.
And so when you said we, so I'm assuming this is your husband, you and your husband decided to make this decision. So it's really good to have a partner that's on board with,
Definitely,
leaving. That's helpful.
I mean, he had lived different places. I love traveling, but so did he. Even before I met him, he had moved to Melbourne by himself and moved to South Carolina by himself. He's originally from Rome, so he was used to traveling. So it was no big deal for him to consider it.
And when you moved out of the country, were you retired or were you still working, or how did you do that?
I worked as a pharmacist for 29 years, 11 months, and 2 weeks, but who's counting? I know everybody's always shocked that I know exactly. I know exactly. So basically, I decided to take early retirement because, after it took us about 3 more years after my sister passed away before we were financially able to do that.
And so when you say financially, do you mean that you knew you were going to move abroad, so you started saving, you start cutting back? What did you do to kind of prepare for this move?
Everything. I mean, no more going out. Me who loves margaritas, and every week I had to go have my margarita and Mexican food fix. I had to cut those things out. I wasn't a great cook, and he's a very good cook, but breakfast I would have at work. I started doing, having that at home. We just basically stayed in the house for 3 years. And at that point, we had some rental properties. So we were trying to think of which ones were worth holding on to, which ones to let go of. We had to have some serious discussions after the 2008 crash. So this really kind of set it up for us. But the most important thing we did was just not shop. I mean, the beneficiaries of my largesse, I guess, would be my nieces, especially the ones that had the same shoe size, because they got whole wardrobes, and it was just I realized how much we were spending that wasn't really necessary, and so we cut all that out, and it became a lot easier.
And when you and your husband moved, did you move all your stuff with you, or you got rid of everything and made the move?
We basically, we left the house we were staying at. We were living in a home. We rented it for a year because we thought, what if we go and don't like it? I mean, even though in the back of my mind, I knew I didn't want to move back to Houston, which is where we were living then, because of all the memories. That's where my sister lived, and we had moved from LA so we could take care of her in Houston. So it was never really home for me. I never felt like LA was where I basically wanted to be, or, you know, that's where I considered more of a home. So it wasn't a big deal for me to leave it, but we still decided to leave the house just in case we came back. So we rented that, but we sold the cars, we sold as much as we could. And we kept like the furniture, like the antiques that we had, you know, in a storage place for a year. So we actually had to come back a couple of years later to do it all over again and get rid of. You know, thinking back, I think we should probably have just sold it, but you know, wanted to like dip our toes in, and then if we didn't like it,
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. I feel like I do that too. I still have stuff like, I just probably don't need to keep this.
Exactly.
So you talk about your research, and since you were both going to be retired, what type of research did you do to decide on the country that you decided on?
I started out reading some of the more famous magazines, like online magazines, and I signed up for a few of them. So they have like cost of living numbers. And so those countries to me sounded, you know, cheaper. But my number one priority, I think, was the language thing, because I'm not really good at my age. I'm 55, and I didn't really feel like I wanted to learn a new language, or one that was really difficult. So Uruguay was too far. And when I narrowed it down, Panama was a really big contender. Well, my family was like, you know, we're in Nigeria. We hardly visit you in Houston, which is so freaking far. We hardly visited you in LA. And now you're going to move an hour by flight away, so you can just forget about it. So that was the thing. And, and then the overriding factor, I guess it would be, was we wanted to be close to his mom in Rome. So we were like, okay, so
Europe's a good option. It's right in the middle. So it's like you're closer to Africa, you're closer.
That's exactly right. He's like, I am not moving back to Rome. So we were like, okay, Malta is an hour flight away from Rome, and it's 6 hours if I just go connecting flights. So it wasn't bad. So it was a nice compromise, and it's allowed me to go back home and visit more often too. So it worked out well.
That's awesome. So there came a point where you left Malta, and where are you currently?
We're right now in Valencia. We stayed in Malta for a total of 16 months. But, you know, everybody told us that we were more than likely going to have island fever, because it's a beautiful place, but it's small. And after a while, you feel like you've seen everything, you've done everything. And it was just time to go, because it's like, okay, what are we going to do now? We took so many flights out of there, like, you know, whatever flights was connecting where, okay, we'll go here this weekend. But how many times can you do that, you know? So I just one day said, okay, we're going to move, but where are we going to move to? So I basically got a map and threw a pencil at it and hit Malaga.
Seriously?
Seriously.
Okay. Interesting form of decision.
And Malaga was where it hit. So that's where we went first. And we ended up not liking it, because it just didn't fit both our personalities, and we both wanted to leave. So we stayed for 7 months, broke our lease, because, you know, the way we both felt is like, there's no reason to like lock yourself in some place. If you don't like it, you know, you have the option of moving. So we moved to Malaga. We moved from Malaga. One weekend we went to Sevilla to visit a friend, and we're like, wow, Seville is so pretty. And so we went back, broke the lease, and moved to Seville, you know, where we stayed for 2 years.
Okay, and you like it there?
Yeah, we liked it there, but in the summertime, I mean, do you know it's the third hottest place in the world, they say? Yeah,
no, didn't know that.
It's like Death Valley, someplace like, I think Kuwait was number 1 or something, and then number 3 was, it's hot. So the first we had like dry heat, and I thought, oh my God, this isn't bad. What's everybody complaining about? We lived in Houston, it's not so bad. The second year, I said, oh, hell no, we are moving. It was
really
hot. Even at 7, 10 p.m., it was hot, steamy hot. So that did us in, and we're like, we want someplace by the water or close to the water. And that's how we ended up coming and researching Valencia. Once we got here, we're both like, yeah, we fit everything we wanted. So this is home for us, I think. You know,
I think.
No, every day passes by, and I'm more sure that this is we actually waited, now we're going on our third year. We actually just bought our apartment because we both feel like this is the place to be. We'll go off and visit other places, but as far as home, this is it for us.
And I love how you show, if you don't like it, you can just move somewhere else.
Yeah.
And some may think that it's supposed to be perfect wherever you decide, and that may not necessarily be the case. And I briefly want to talk just a little bit on race relations, because it's funny how, you get the question, how do they feel about Black people wherever you go? And especially if you're from the U.S. and the U.S. has traumatized us with all the race relations they have there. I wanted to bring this up because, just because people have different experiences, and every time I've gone to Spain, I've been there 4 times and I've had some racial issues every single time I've gone. And I like to hear how your experience was just completely different. You love it.
Completely different. I mean, Malaga didn't have that issue for me. It was just more of like, I didn't really like, it's so spread out. The center is really small, and, you can live like in a village outside and come and, take the bus in or what have you. It was more like I didn't fit in, and their accent is really hard to understand. I mean, the Andalusian accent is just, especially Malaga. So I felt like even after the 6-7 months, I still didn't understand anything. So I just was not into that. Seville, I never had a problem. I was the only Black person in the little pueblo. I mean, we lived in a pueblo that's like the size of like a subdivision, think a subdivision. And everybody tried to help me with my English. With my Spanish. They were all really happy to have me. I didn't have any issues. And in Valencia, telling people, this is my experience, this is what it is. And I interviewed other couples that have been here. And my husband is white, so people think, well, maybe you're treated differently because they see you and there's some sort of, but every place we go, it doesn't matter where, I make sure that I leave him at home and I go out by myself.
You leave him at home?
Yeah, because that is part of my research to see if this is a potential, it's a place I want to live in, because I was going with that outlook to a lot of places. So I always made sure to experience it both ways. And Valencia is like, nobody cares. That's pretty much, and sometimes that's the best reaction ever. It's like you're not some exotic thing. You're just there, and they're just like, whatever. Good.
Yeah, exotic is also just as bizarre. I feel like I'm starting to feel that a little bit in Portugal, which is kind of like this. I don't know how to feel about this.
Well, I think it's because also you're very pretty, so men are just like that. So.
It's like, wait a minute, bro. I don't know what's going to happen. So, what process did you have to do as a U.S. What's your citizenship? Is it U.S. citizenship or?
U.S.
Okay, so what did you have to do to stay in Spain for an extended period of time?
Basically, the only difference, like, we have to show exactly the same amount of money. Like, when we processed that paperwork in Malta, it was like, I think, very cheap at that point. It was $12,000 for both a year that you had to show that you had the savings. And now I think they moved it up closer to the EU numbers. So it's more like 25,000. So you have to show that you have that.
So as a retired person, you have to show that you have that annually, and do you have to reapply every year and show that every year, or how does that work?
The only difference between an EU, because he's Italian, so he's EU. So the only difference is your ID and your visa is good for 5 years for him. And because I'm his spouse, I get exactly the same thing. So if you were an American, it's 1 year the first time, then it's 2 years, your renewal, and then it's 5 years, your third one, at which point you can apply for citizen residency or whatever. And for him, 5 years, so you could go straight to residency after that. So that's basically the only difference. But everything else, you have to show the money, you have to show that you have the private health care, and basically that you can support yourself and not be a burden to society.
Right, right. I was just curious for when you are retired, because I'm not, I'm just on the applying for the long stay visa. If you're retired, like, do they say if it's $24,000 a year, and when you have to renew, is the expectation that you have to have twice that in savings or your pension when you do your second year renewal, so that they know you
I
can stay
believe you do.
longer?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, you do.
okay,
For
okay.
and, the visa is called the Non Lucrative Visa, and basically, when you have the 1 year, so we would have to in 5 years show the same thing, or he can just apply straight for residency, which is what we're going to do at that point. But if you were from the US, then you would have to, after that year, you would have to reapply. And it depends. Like in Spain, it depends on what embassy you're dealing with, who you happen to see that day, because some people go in and they ask for like to show the amount of money. Some, I've had friends go in where they just ask you for receipts from like the grocery store just to prove that you've been there and you haven't been out of the country. And so it depends.
So how do you feel that moving abroad has changed your perspective on life?
I think traveling just changes your perspective about everything. I mean, I remember like being in the US, you think of like the Cold War, for instance, and if you told me that I would travel and love Romania, for instance, I would have been like, no, because what you see on television, especially in the US, the news is kind of like, they just show you what's happening there. And even what they show you, it's not all, it's like everything bad. Like it's this constant feeding of stuff that shapes your thinking. So if you don't look outside of that, you're going to be thinking that the world is like, not to be messed with, and you should just stay in your little cocoon. And once you travel, you're just like, what? It's cheaper. The people are nice. It's like it changes your whole. I mean, I had a little bit of that coming from Nigeria, so I saw like a little. I was still young, but still, I could see that there was a world outside of what you're told. But to actually live it and experience it, it's mind blowing. It's something that I would recommend for everybody if they can do it. You definitely want to see what's out there and see that you've been misled.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that, because when we talked about this on the interview I had with you, of just like, I didn't know it was a big deal, but I started getting all these comments like, well, why didn't you go to Africa? And I was like, so y'all I'm sort of go to Africa just because I'm Black? Like, what? Well, I can move wherever I want to. There are Africans that don't live in Africa. Like, what are you doing? Like, why is that your thing? Why do you care? But it's interesting that I didn't even think that was going to be like a question that I get often. And I've been to Africa. I've been to a bunch of places. And it's just, I think what people have to understand is there's certain places that feel like home, and there's certain places that don't. You have to do the research of what place speaks to you personally. Like, even if you're from the States, certain states you may not want to live in for whatever reason, whatever your personal reason is. And you have to kind of figure out if this is where you're going to call home. Hey, what are the amenities that you need?
Yes.
And
very, very important.
Very important. And then a lot of people want something that's affordable. And the assumption that just all of Africa is affordable is not true.
No, like I was telling you, like being in Lagos, for instance, the capital of Nigeria, well, the old capital, the rent is insane. I mean, you could pay easily $2,000 to $3,000 for one bedroom. I mean, that's like double what we pay to live for a month here. So you've got to think of all these things. Like my husband is like, he's okay. Like he goes home with me and he's fine. But we lose electricity so often. I mean, really. Especially the city where I prefer. I don't like Lagos per se. So when we go to Ibadan, which is where I usually stay, you can count on like no electricity for like 15 hours a day. Now, if you're not willing to put up with that, and you don't, you can't run a generator for 15 hours.
You can't run an online business either.
It costs a lot. You can be online. It's hot. So there's all these things to think about. It sounds great. It sounds wonderful. I would love to be with my family but after you're used to a certain level of life, I feel like I can do that.
I think that's the amenities of what you want in whatever country you're in are definitely going to be important. And I think sometimes in the US as Black people, we've been traumatized. And I think the assumption is that, well, if the US is as racist as it is, going to Europe, it has to be even more racist.
Exactly.
And I can get why one would process that way, but you got to experience this. It's not like that. And I feel like in the US, you have to be in a box. You're either Black, white, Latino, Asian. Like, you don't get to represent your own country. They put you in like these boxes. So
whether you like it or not.
Yeah. And so you don't even get the culture of all the other countries. They just lump you into whatever box you can check. And so it's not like that when you leave the US. And I think, again, depending on what your job is, how much you need the internet, the heat, the cost of living, you're going to start to research based on, or even what you have to do to get in the country and be legal.
Yes.
You're going to start to research that and find out what works for you. And don't think that if you don't like that country, that you can't just go somewhere else. You could totally go somewhere else.
Yeah, you can definitely go somewhere else. I call it the experimental expat. And I stole that from somebody, but it's true. I mean, your expat experience should be an experiment. And if you don't like it, you can just redo it. And that's it. That's the way it works.
And that's a good point. And again, the reason why you made this leap is because you wanted to take, well, I'm assuming one of the reasons why people make this leap is because you wanted to take your life and have some control over it. And you can still have control if you move to another place and you don't happen to like where you are or whatever. And I think that's a good point, because when I decided to move, I was worried, and everyone's asking me now, "Are you going to be there forever?" I'm like, I don't even know what I'm going to do next week. How the hell I even know if I'm going to live here forever? Like, get back up. You know what I mean?
That's part. If you have so many choices, you can do whatever you want. I mean, you're not locked into anything. Absolutely. So, which leads me to my point of not buying property when you move, right away, because
I agree.
You would be locked in. And that's something you don't want to do. You want to experiment and go,
I agree. And definitely don't buy property in a country and you don't know what happens when it's time to get rid of it. I find a lot of people don't really understand the capital gains tax. In some countries, it is 50%.
Yeah.
And it amazes me how people don't consider that when they actually decide to buy in another country. So if you're
like Spain, for instance, you're locked into the whole mindset is to have it, live it for the kids. They live it for their kids. It's not to flip. So when people sit there and they say, "Oh, I bought a house," and it's like, "Well, you're stuck." Like, when we were buying the house, they're like, "If you sell it before this time," which is like a year, I think it was like a year and a half, you can only ask this much for it. I mean, they told us straight up. And after that, you can ask whatever you want. You may not get it, but you find people that buy property and they're stuck with it. We had when we lived in Malaga, there was this lady who lived, she's like, my dream was to be in a finca, like outside of town, because she was bred from the US and blah, blah, blah. So she bought this finca in the middle of nowhere, lots of land. And then the husband had a heart attack after a year.
Oh, no.
They couldn't find their address. It was hard to get to. So, I mean, he was practically dead by the time they found this place. And she was trying to sell it. And 3 years later, she's had like 4 people come through to even check it out. I'm like, so she's going to stay there forever because she can't afford to move. So these are things you need to think about. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. And what advice would you give someone who's thinking about moving abroad?
Do your research. Do your research. I call it putting all your ducks in a row. You've got to do that, because if you don't believe everything that you read. Don't
believe any of it now.
don't just believe one find out what the true cost of living is, because these days, I mean, it's different even from 7 years ago. I stayed in my blog because I was looking for information on Malta and I really couldn't find it. So when I got there, I was like, I'm going to start this. I'm going to start doing like a cost of living every year, for anybody who's looking to move out, so they know. And when I moved to Spain, I did the same thing, because it's like, you can get the numbers. You can go to Numeo and get, and it's close. So you can go to any of the online magazines and get it. And it's not even close. So there's such a disparity between the numbers. And I'm just like, okay, so you need to do that and make sure you have enough. And don't burn your bridges, because you never know what might happen wherever you go. You may need to come back. Don't run away from like your problems. Say, oh, I'm going to just leave all my student loans back there. I'm going to leave all my, because, if it doesn't work out, if there's a reason or anything, your problems go with you. So you need to, if you're going to relax and, have a new mindset, make sure you take care of your problems, do whatever you can to make your new life great.
Yeah. And I've been having people reach out to me lately, just really feeling like frustrated, kind of how I felt when I moved. And the reason why I wanted to kind of create this series is because I wanted the perspective of other people who moved abroad, because I feel like I did it so abruptly and I would not tell anyone to do it the way that I did it. So I didn't feel like authority in this area to say, oh, you should move like this, because you should not totally move out the way that I did.
Yeah,
it was out of like
3 years.
Yeah, it was actually out of sadness and everything else. And it's not that I left thinking it was going to be better. It just happened to be, but it could have went horribly wrong. But you're right. Your problems can still come with you. And if you are coming to a country and you're isolated and you don't make an effort to go out and meet people, you can feel even more isolated. So if you are an introvert, which I'm an introvert with extrovert tendencies. So being in the house, I'm fine with. I don't care what country I'm in, but then I do want to socialize and feel okay and welcomed and safe and eat some good food. And so that's kind of how I looked at it. But you're right. You can research it and just add 100% to whatever they say.
Well, but sometimes there's nothing wrong with just taking a grand leap of, I mean, you've been there almost a year now, so it's not like it could be all bad, but there's still a couple of steps that you need to take and see.
I should have taken. Yeah.
But sometimes
taken some more steps.
The best. But like you said, if you don't like it after a year, hey, you tried. And you tried, and that's is more about a person than, Fidel, my husband always refers to this old man that was our neighbor who had this $70,000 car, and so every time we'd pass by, we always looked at the car and like, oh, this is nice. And he was like, I don't know, 70 something. He walked really slowly, and and every time we would see, it's like, what are these days? I'm going to go to Italy. I'm going to have food. And he's looking at us like, what the hell are you talking about? Go already.
Right.
Like you don't have that much time, but it's people that stay and say, I wish I could. I wish I had. And there's so many regrets. So, my sister thought she would travel like for years after she finished up work and she raised her 3 kids, and life is like, no, you're not. Guess what? You're gone. So you just gotta.
Yeah. You see that. I think everyone, and that's what kind of hit me, was so many people, they all thought they had even tomorrow.
Yeah.
And they didn't. And so just the encouragement of whatever you want to do, whether it's move abroad, whether it's travel, whether it's leave your job, leave a bad relationship, whatever it is.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be like taking, maybe you just want to move from Boise to Minneapolis or something, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be this giant thing. It's what you always wanted to do, what you dream about doing. Nobody's going to fault you for wanting to come back if it doesn't work out, but you tried.
Awesome. Well, it was an absolute pleasure. I thank you so much for joining me. And guys, if you have any questions, just put them in the comments below, and you'll have all her contact information if you want to speak with her directly. Kem Kem, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Have a good day.